Welcome back to the Chow Time Pod. It's your host Red. I got a video today from Alexander Grace. He brings the charts in just like wheat waffles, and this chart is a slutty chart. How slutty we've been in the past and how slutty we are now. So it's a little bit eye-opening. So please like and subscribe down below. I really appreciate that. Let's get to that chow. It's chow time.
The sexual marketplace is always changing and evolving, and we have access to some new data that shows some fascinating trends. Check out this graph. What you're looking at here are the number of sexual partners that someone in their 20s has had. And you can see here that most people in their 20s, both men and women, have had between 2 and 4 sexual partners. But there's also strong figures for just having 1 sexual partner or between 5 and 10. So if you're in your 20s and you're a man and you've had somewhere between like 2 and 10 sexual partners, that's pretty normal. But one of the things I really like about this graph is how it shows how things have changed over the decades. You can see here that in the 90s, 11% of young men were virgins. In the 2000s, it was just 9%, but in the 20-teens, that has jumped up to 15%. That's about a 40% increase in male virginity from the last decade. That's a huge jump up, and my prediction is that it's only going to get higher. Check out my video if you haven't seen it yet on the 10 reasons why young men are having less sex than they ever have before. I'll put a link to that down below. But this graph also gives really fascinating data on women, which I think is sorely needed because a lot of men who visit the manosphere, I'm worried that they're leaving with the impression that most women are hugely promiscuous and just slutting it up every single weekend with new partners. The data doesn't really bear that out. So let me ask you this question. What would you consider slutty for a woman in her 20s? Like, what's a number that you'd be like, whoa, that's really promiscuous? Is it 10 plus? Would you say that a woman in her 20s still slept with 10 or more guys is really promiscuous? Okay, if that's your number, that's fine. But let me tell you that the number of women that are that slutty is pretty rare. If you add this group to this group and this group, it actually only adds up to 10%, which means that 90% of women in their 20s have had less than 10 partners and are not very slutty by your own definition. Even if you add in the figure.
That's actually surprising as hell. I did not think it was that little women that are that promiscuous. I didn't realize it was only 10%. I was thinking more like in the 35 percentile. So this is pretty eye-opening for us men in general. Like, no, there's not that many super slutty women out there. It's just they happen to be the loudest ones that we always happen to see, and I'm almost positive they're the most attractive ones too. That's why they're so slutty. They're getting so much attention that they can't say no.
Of the women who've had between 5 and 10 partners, which maybe you consider like partly slutty, that still only adds 20%, which brings the total up to 30%. That's still the majority, 70% of women.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I was about right, about 30%. I would consider 10 to be in the promiscuous, personally. So, okay, I wasn't too far off then. But the super promiscuous that are past 10 is only 10%, which those would be the ones I more avoid than the actual ones that are about 10.
Who are not sluts. I know emotionally that can be hard if there's like a girl that you've had one-itis for and you've idolized her, but she's never given you the time of day and she's busy sleeping around with every guy that's not you. Emotionally, it can feel like all women are total sluts, but the data just doesn't really reflect that. When you look at the statistics, we're not really in some huge slutty epidemic, except in one area that's pretty interesting. You just zoom in right there because you can see that at the top end, there is actually an explosion in really super duper slutty women that's never really happened before. You can see that the big numbers, like the people who've slept with 50 plus people, that's still most.
Dang, back in the days, it wasn't even on the chart. It didn't register. There weren't women that were sleeping with that many men. And then slowly it's creeped up. And then the last decade, holy cow, look at this. That's a big jump. I mean, it's small, but it's big jump compared to the last one. So
belongs to men. But in the previous decades, really slutty women didn't really register statistically, but they do now. It looks like there's like a 500% increase or something. Even on those lesser numbers, like the 11 to 20 demographic or the 21 to 50 demographic, you can see that over the decades, there's a gentle trend upwards from women. Right now, it's still the minority of women, so we'll have to keep watching this space to see if this trend continues or if it stops or if it even reverses itself. But one thing that I find really interesting about this graph is that you can see that just like in so many areas in life, women find themselves at the top of the bell curve while men find themselves more at the extremes. which gender is more likely to have one partner or 0 partners? It's men.
Yep.
But men are also the ones more likely to have a large number
plus
of
50.
partners. In the sexual marketplace, men exist at the extremes, whereas women occupy the center. You actually find that to be true of men and women in lots of areas of life. I'll get back to the graph in just a moment, but consider something like wealth. Like you probably noticed that the wealthiest people on the planet, the richest, the most successful, often tend to be men,
male.
but also the most broke, like the most number of like homeless people
Is
also
also
seems
male.
to be men. You can also find this with intelligence, with the guys with like the really crazy genius, like super intelligence IQ, they tend to be men, but also the guys with really low IQ happen to be men. Why do men tend to exist at both ends of the spectrum? Well, there's actually an important evolutionary reason for this. It's called the variability hypothesis, and I'm going to quickly explain what that is because it's going to make so many things make sense to you once you understand this. So understand this, that historically speaking, women were a lot more likely to reproduce than men. 4
Correct.
out of 5 women have passed on their genes throughout history, whereas that's only
80%.
2 out of 5 men. When your chance of reproducing as a biological woman is so high, you can understand why evolution is a little bit more conservative in the gene distribution. Like, okay, we don't need to take crazy risks here. We're throwing genes together to create a woman, but we're pretty sure she's going to reproduce because most women do. So we're not going to go too out there. We're going to play this one quite modestly. Just make her something of a typical woman, and I'm pretty certain she's going to be successful. That's not the case for men. Historically, only 2 out of 5 men ever reproduced. And so if you want to be one of those top guys, you want to be the winner, you can't just be average. You can't afford to play it safe. You got to try something. You got to get noticed. Evolution.
Well, makes sense. We do stupid shit to try to get noticed. That's why we die. At least in the caveman days. This it's kind of funny now that I think about it.
Was not conservative with the gene distribution of men. It couldn't afford to be. Evolution couldn't play it safe with men, and that's what the variability hypothesis is. It's sometimes called the greater male variability hypothesis, and it's the notion that you tend to find a greater variety of traits inside men than you do in women. Women can play it safe, be boring, just like, oh yeah, here are these genes, you'll probably reproduce. But for men, it's like, oh my God, 60% of men never get chosen to reproduce. They never find partners. Okay, we got to try something big. We got to get noticed. So yeah, add in some of these genes, add in some of those genes. Like, who knows? It might be a huge disaster, but it could also be a crazy success.
Makes
as a man,
sense.
it's
It totally
worth the
makes
risk.
sense.
It's go big or go home as a man. That's why.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, yeah, it's the go big or go home mentality for all men, or how men are raised into society, especially because very few of us actually mate. Very, like, nowadays it's used to be, it's a little bit more common than back then, where it was even less males that reproduced. So yeah, you see a lot of idiots that do a lot of stupid shit to try to get women, and then you do see a lot of smart people, like smart men. Like I know quite a bit of very intelligent men, but I also know a lot of idiot, like, I wouldn't call them idiots, but not so intelligent men. So
many guys end up on both ends of the bell curve. Genetically speaking, as a man, you are the experimental gender. It's not an accident that men end up at the extremes. We're actually designed biologically to either be big winners or big losers. And you can see that in this graph. There's a huge percentage of men who've only had one partner or even 0. And there's a small percentage of men at the top who are having a huge amount of success. I did the maths on this graph, and it's pretty fascinating or depressing, depending on where you sit on the bell curve. But look, if you calculate all these 3 groups here, this equals 57%.
Damn.
And they've slept with 90 women in total. So between them, that 57% of men have had 90 women, 90 sexual partners in their 20s. Now that 2.5% of men that you see at the top, assuming that 50 plus means that it might be some of them having 50, some of them having like 200. So we'll just simplify and say like 75 on average. That 2.5% of men have slept with 187 women between them. I really think that gets across the point that I'm trying to make here, because you can see that the top 2.5% of men have had twice the number of sexual partners as the bottom 57%. Now, luckily for you, as a man, your life is not going to be limited by genetic determinism. You can take action as an individual to improve things in your life, and watching this channel is a really important step, because you're increasing your understanding of masculinity, of femininity, of the dynamics between men and women, of the psychology of dating and relationships and sexuality. that knowledge gives you a really important edge. I
It
assume that's
does.
the motivation for why.
That's why I love doing what I do, and then, presenting other content creators that just have such great knowledge and such great insights into these things just to share with men. It's hard to life out there. It's hard, and for men to excel, especially if they didn't have someone to help them understand to be men, it's very hard. So these men's channel that are growing, these podcasts, I love it because there's so many lost men out there. As long as they can find some of the channels, even if they find the shitty ones, I tell you the truth, they'll at least get some knowledge for them to build something with. Hopefully they don't find the really, really shitty ones where, they get scammed and stuff. And hopefully they find channels like mine and like, fucking Alex's. But it's an evil world we live in.
Most people watching these videos, why people sign up for my Patreon for the more nuanced stuff, why people do my paid course, because they're trying to understand this stuff better so that they can improve things for themselves. And
again, one of the only people that I would say is not a grifter that has paid courses and paid things is Alex. He actually puts a tremendous amount of work and tremendous amount of things into his courses, and they are very, very cheap. Like, they are very inexpensive. Like, he is not trying to rip people off with like hundreds of dollars on his courses or anything. Not trying to like promote him or anything, but this is a big reason why I follow this man.
And it'll work. I get messages all the time from people who say that watching this content has helped them become more successful in their dating life and in their relationships. But it's not just about knowledge. You can do stuff like looks maxing, good clothes, good grooming, going to the gym, getting a good body and muscles. You can make yourself more successful, earn more money, become a player in the world. That's one of the things I like most about being a man, is that you have a much bigger capacity than I think a woman does to control your own destiny, to shape life the way that you want it to be. So hopefully you find that message up.
Yeah, women have a glass ceiling and we have a glass floor. And we break through that floor, we're going down. But it is what it is.
Optimistic and empowering. I know I certainly did. But I want to finish the video with just a couple of disclaimers, because I think I might have casually mentioned a few times like those guys who are sleeping with lots of women. I referred to them as like the top percentage of men, or like the top men. I don't mean to imply that I link the quality of a man with the number of women that he has slept with. I'm not personally a fan of male promiscuity when it's in like crazy, exaggerated kind of forms. And I actually think that guys who feel the need to sleep around that much have got some psychological stuff they should work through. So I just wanted to mention that in case my video is coming across as like me being pro like sexual conquest for men, as though that makes you a better man. No, that's not what I'm trying to get across. That's not what I believe. And I also want to acknowledge that all of this data is from the General Social Survey, which as far as I know is based on people honestly self-reporting. And there's always people in the comment section who like love to virtue signal like, oh, you can't trust, that kind of methodology in research, just asking people to tell the truth.
It's just a generalization. This is where people think, like, yeah, oh, where did you pull this data from? It's like, yeah, we're not using this data as like cold, hard facts. We're just like, this is a good generalization of what might be going on in society.
Not true science. Like, I hear you. I've heard it before, and part of me even agrees with you. Like, there's some legitimacy to that point of view. So if as a principled stand out of like academic purity, you want to throw away everything that's in this video, you're like, no, you can't trust anything that it says. That's fine. That doesn't bother me. The only thing I'll ask is that you're consistent, right? Like, if you have an emotional investment in the story that all women are massive sluts or whatever, and that's why you're throwing out this research, that's not really a good reason. I would say that you need to be consistent across the board and not listen to any social surveys on any topic. Even if they perfectly conform to your views and your beliefs, you'd be a hypocrite if you were to say that those ones are legitimate and this one's not. So you can believe these statistics, or you can say that it's all nonsense. I don't really mind.
Yeah, I'm not saying I believe him. I don't think Alex truly believes. It's just, it's a good gauge of where things are. The numbers might not be exact, but you can get a good sea of things of like, oh, there's a lot more women that are reporting that, yeah, I'm a super slut. Like, they actually report that themselves. So that's like, and the numbers has grown. So honesty, maybe in, some lies here and there, but society does seem to go pull towards the more promiscuous way.
fine, so long as you're consistent. Have you ever heard of the concept of personalization? It comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's referring to the notion that we tend to make neutral events personal to us. It's a particular kind of mind virus where we make ourselves miserable by kind of assuming that the world and people are out to get us, and it's all unique to us.
This is the women's mentality and the feminist mentality right here.
Everybody does this to a certain extent, but they're not often conscious of it. Like, a lot of things feel personal to us, particularly in our romantic relationships, when actually they're not. If what I'm saying is resonating with you and you're like, ooh, yes, I do that, and I don't like that I do that, I want to work on that, then you're going to get a lot of value out of my latest Patreon video, because it's on the topic of personalization. We go into a lot of depth, a lot of discussion. Patreon's where I tend to post my more in-depth, nuanced kind of topics. You know, the sort of stuff that doesn't really appeal to like the YouTube algorithm, but for the people who are really dedicated to understanding this stuff at a deep level, you're going to love the Patreon content.
How was that, Chow? That was an interesting chart. You know, gave me some insights. I didn't know there wasn't. I assumed, like what he assumed, that the world's just promiscuous as hell, you know. But seeing that chart makes me like, makes me a little bit happier that there's not so many women that are like 10 plus. The ones that are probably just the loudest ones on Instagram and stuff, which we always cover. So it makes sense. So I'm happy about that. So it is what it is. Please like and subscribe down below. I'd really appreciate that. And catch you guys next time. It's chow time.